Incredibles 2 is the 14-year-awaited sequel to the original Incredibles film, directed by Brad Bird. This one is once again directed by him, and this film picks up immediately after where the first film left off with the Battle of the Underminer. And after that battle, Frozone, Mr. Incredible, and Elastigirl meet up with Winston and Evelyn Dever, who run DevTech, which is this huge corporation, and they want to get supers back into the spotlight again. They want them to be legal in this world, and they think Elastigirl is their best play to get to that position. So while Elastigirl is off doing these important missions for DevTech, Mr. Incredible is left at home to be a stay-at-home dad to these super-powered kids going through their own troubles, and also a baby who's going through a ton of troubles. If you've seen the last Incredibles, you know that this baby Jack has so many powers. How are you able to control that when he's just a baby right now? I was really pumped for this movie. I adore the first Incredibles movie. It's not my favorite Pixar film, my top 5 it's not even in, but it's like number 6 right now. It used to be a number 5, but then Coco came out and that kind of bumps it out a little bit, but I still really love the Incredibles. I love what they did with the world, and this is one of those films that people really wanted a sequel to. Like, there's so much more to this world that you could explore. There's so much more to these characters that you could possibly explore. So of course it took Pixar 14 years to make it, and in that time they made 3 Cars films, 3 of them, and Finding Dory, a sequel that only Ellen DeGeneres wanted. So I was pretty pumped, but I wanted to be cautiously optimistic because this is a film that has so much hype behind it. It's easy to go in with just so many expectations and then just be let down by it because it's just not as good as the first movie. And is it as good as the first film? No, I wouldn't say that. But that doesn't really mean anything because Incredibles 2 is still awesome! One thing that I was really curious about was how they were going to handle the switching of main protagonists. Because Mr. Incredible was the one going off on missions in the first film, now it's going to be Elastigirl, and for totally different reasons. While Mr. Incredible has to stay home, I was wondering how that shift was going to work, and I thought it worked very well for the characters. First of all, Elastigirl, she's actually trying to embrace that former self that she used to be when heroes were legal. Instead of being the stay-at-home mom, now she has to embrace being a hero again, and you get to see her personality really shine through in that respect, and also see how her character kind of changes through it all too. Like, it could have been very easy to just have this character be the main lead now, just have her do a bunch of action stuff and don't really learn anything. But I think she actually did learn something. I think she had a really solid arc in this film to go through. And also, Mr. Incredible, Craig T. Nelson, I've always loved his voice as Bob Parr. I think he's excellent in that. So seeing him in this movie, knowing that Craig T. Nelson is really, like, a lot older since the last time he voiced Mr. Incredible, and you see him just have to be so exhausted as Mr. Incredible now because he's being worn out by these kids, especially Jack. I thought that was hysterical, but it's not just hysterical. Like, it could have been so easy to just have him be, oh, a grouchy stay-at-home dad for the comedy, but they actually do work in a really touching kind of emotional arc with his character and actually fleshed him out a bit more, made him learn a new lesson. That didn't make him completely forget about his lesson he learned in the last film. But I gotta say though, those scenes with him and Jack are great. Not just because Bob is just so exhausted and used to it, but Jack is just super cool. His powers are used at random because he's a baby, he doesn't know how to control it, and it's hysterical. There's one scene where they kind of reintroduce to you his powers in the film with a raccoon, and that is one of the funniest parts of this film for me, and also one of the most entertaining parts as well. However, that entertaining minor action sequence doesn't really compare to every other action sequence in this film. This movie was so well done in the action sequences because the animation, it's just so fast and quick and so frenetic that it just adds a lot of intensity to the scenes. And when people are getting punched or when people are desperately trying to get to something before something crashes or blows up, the frenetic kind of animation adds to a lot of the suspense that you can have. Also, the musical score, Giacchino, I love you. I love the score for The Incredibles, and I was hoping that Incredibles 2 wasn't just going to be a retread. It really isn't. There are a couple of familiar musical numbers, of course, because it's The Incredibles, it's the sequel, it's the continuation, but they are able to introduce new music compositions that I really adored and really loved listening to. I love the sound of the Incredibles movies. And because of how great the music was, it felt like we were literally just slipping right back into the Incredibles world with no problems at all getting reintroduced. It was like I had seen it yesterday, but I hadn't seen it yesterday. I haven't seen it in like a couple months, but I was able to just slip back into it like, yes, I know this world. However, because this is a sequel, I'm sure there are many people out there wondering, how is the story? Does it come across too cash grabby? Does it come across too sequelitis? Because sure, I already mentioned Elastigirl and Mr. Incredible, they have nice little arcs, but what about the entire story as a whole? Does it work? And I'd say, yeah, the story is for the most part very good here. Like, I love how they introduce DevTech and how they want to get supers back into the spotlight again. I really like that story arc. Bob Odenkirk and Catherine Keener did a very good job playing these characters and introducing some more depth into the world. I was really fascinated by some of the newer characters we were getting as supers who are just in hiding, and though they aren't like extremely fleshed out like the Incredibles team, while they're there, they are memorable and they have some neat powers that lead to some very fun and exciting action sequences. And for the most part, I was really hooked on what the villain's story was at the beginning. If I had to have one flaw with this movie, is that when you eventually learn more about the villain, this is not as good. The villain's name is the Screenslaver, and it's very obvious just from the get-go, not gonna top Syndrome. Syndrome in the first Incredibles movie is amazing, not just because of the performance by Jason Lee, not just because of the clever dialogue, but because his character is a statement. He represents something that is important. And in this movie, the villain tries to say certain things at first that immediately had my attention, like, okay, if you flesh into that a little bit more, that could actually be really interesting. But then once you eventually find out what's going on, if you hadn't already predicted it after one line of dialogue was said, because that's how long it took me to figure out who the frickin' villain was, what the twist was. At that point, the villain doesn't really leave that much of an impact on you, when at first, they kind of set it up in a neat way, but then it divulges into something else that could have still worked, but when it's all said and done by the end of the movie, it just didn't really feel like the villain left that much of a fingerprint. And it's not just because Syndrome is amazing and one of the best Pixar villains ever, probably the best Pixar villain ever, because it's so easy to just say he's not as compelling as Syndrome, and I can understand that because it's true, he's not as compelling as Syndrome, but in the movie, if you just separate these movies and you just look at The Incredibles 2 on its own, it's still not that memorable of a villain. They try to have a twist to make it memorable, but at the end of the day, you've seen it before and you also predicted it like many minutes ago. At least it took me like, I don't know how far into the movie it took me for me to listen to just one line of dialogue and be like, I bet the twist is this. And then it was. But besides one weak characterization as far as the villain goes, I still had a blast seeing the Incredibles family again. Frozone is a frickin' god. I love Sam Jackson as Frozone, and he's great in this film. He's got a little bit more to do, so that's fun. Violet, I like what they did with her and Tony Ridinger, the boy that she meets at the end of the last film. That was really cool. And Dash, he's also still very funny. I heard some complaints from another reviewer. I'm not sure if a lot of other people felt this way, but they said that they thought Dash was really annoying, and I didn't really think so. Like, Dash was still the same as he was in the first film, besides being voiced by a different voice actor. Like, he's still got the same young boy wit and humor, and I love how he uses his power still. Like, even though he can have his snippy, witty moments earlier on with the family, when stuff goes down later, he's still able to prove himself as a good member of the team and not be, oh, someone has to save me, I'm screwing everything up. So I love seeing all the characters come back. I love the introduction of the new characters. The animation is outstanding, and the music that goes along with it, and the action sequences they create, it's gorgeous. It's a really fantastically made film, and if it weren't for just the villain, I think if the villain just got worked on a little bit more, I think they could have had something really special in that regard. And once again, not terrible. It's an interesting idea, just not really as fleshed out enough as it could be. But besides that, I had a fantastic time with Incredibles 2. I walked out of this film loving it, and besides that one flaw I had, this was definitely worth the 14-year wait. And if they're gonna make an Incredibles 3, I'm all for it. Please make it happen sooner, though, because I freaking love this world and I love this family. Please don't make us wait any much longer. Go into this movie and have fun with it because it's outstanding. I'm going to see Incredibles 2 an A. Besides the one villain, the characters from the first are still there, and they're exactly the same except some new layers of depth are added to them, and I really love seeing that in this film. The comedy here is outstanding. I laughed so hard in this movie at a couple points. It's not just baby humor or just kiddie humor, it's actually stuff that can work for adults. The action sequences actually stand out more than some other action films that have come out this year. The musical score is up there with like Infinity War for like best score of the year. In fact, I'd probably put this over Infinity War. Probably. I just love the music so much. And if you're worried that this is going to come across as sequelitis, like I could have waited for this to come like straight to Blu-ray, I wouldn't worry about that. I think the story, what they did here, was spot on. Exactly what I needed for an Incredibles 2. But if you've seen Incredibles 2, leave in the comments below what you thought of it. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.